back at 2016, Michigan was won by just 10,000 votes. When we look at the amount of people, the thousands of people that are in this room, if every one of you just influence 5 people, 10 people, it's going to be a landslide. But it's going to take you doing your part. And you've heard from so many people why you should do your part. I think I'm going to bring a different perspective for you, though. People often ask me, well, how'd you get in this? I'd always say, I don't do politics, I do people. Until I understood that politics is people.
Yeah.
That it affects all of our life, and I've understood it in a way like I never would have. God really set me up. 19 years ago, I get this call out of the blue. And my office said, Mr. Trump's on the line. I'm like, yeah, sure, right. Yeah. No, Pastor Paul, Mr. Trump's on the line. And we like to have fun and play around, so finally I go, okay, I'll pick it up. I'm thinking there's joking with me, and so if I pick it up and Robin goes, Mr. Trump would like to speak to you, and there's that distinguished voice. Is that Jan? So good to see you. And there's that distinguished voice, and he says, you're fantastic. He goes, you've got the it factor. I said, oh, sir, we call that the anointing. That was our hello. He said, I've been watching you on Christian television. I want you to hear what I'm saying. I've been watching you on Christian television. He said, I love your sermon on the value of vision. And he literally began to verbatim repeat to me my 3-part series on the value of vision. He started telling me how he grew up and he was confirmed as a child of Presbyterian, and how his dad would take him to Dr. Billy Graham, who he absolutely loved, and how he'd go see Dr. David Jeremiah, and how he'd listen to Bill Gaither. And I'm sitting here thinking, how does he know all these people in our world? and he starts naming all these different people that he watches on TV, and he goes, and I love, he goes, there's nobody that's been like Dr. Billy Graham, and he goes, but I love how Jimmy Swaggart preaches. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, Billy Graham, the grace of God, Jimmy Swaggart, hellfire and brimstone, and Paula White somewhere right in the middle. And he tells me about his life and how he hit some speed bumps like we all do. And how maybe he derailed some things, and how he put his hand back to the plow, and the strong faith and fortitude that he was raised with. How his mother was a very godly woman. How she would pray. And so he said, are you ever up in New York? I said, well, I am. I come up there pretty often. And I was doing a Bible study for the New York Yankees. Of course, that's when we won the World Series. But anyway. And so, yay, Yankees. So I was doing a Bible study for the Yankees. And I went up, and he said, well, why don't you stop by? So I thought maybe I'd stop by, say hello, and that would be the end of it. Alvita, when you would walk into Trump Tower and go to the 26th floor, there was no glass door then or anything. It was just, they bring you right in. And he has the most open door policy. And when I say that, it's like, you met Eric. I could talk about Eric forever. I've known him since he was 17 years old. This is a 19-year relationship. And I work out every morning. I'll talk to you about that in a minute with Ivanka. And I mean, just this whole family has been an integral part of my life as I have with their life. And so when I went in, I walked in, and it was interesting because I'd see his kids coming in and out. Meredith, who would write his books, would sit right back over here, and Rona was right over next to there, and everybody was there. So it was like you could hear all conversations. People just walk right in and out. And so he said, well, let's go down. He brought Keith and a few people, and he said, let's go have lunch. We went and had lunch, and took me to this fancy place. I couldn't pronounce it. He said, there's stories I could tell so many. Do I have just a few extra minutes, Pastor Paul? Because he took me to a place I can't even pronounce. This is for real. It was called Jean George. Now, I called it Jean George's. It's called Jean George, right? And I didn't know this. I never told this story. And at least publicly, I didn't know. It's our first time we're all out to eat. And I look at the menu. Now, I'm just a girl from Mississippi that was a real messed up Mississippi girl that's daddy committed suicide, sexually sexually and physically abused. And here the gospel ties at 18 years old. I was living in a trailer, Mount Airy, Maryland, had a child out of wedlock. Don't tell me God can't turn a life around. Don't tell me God can't do amazing, miraculous things. I've never been to a fancy restaurant like that. I didn't even know why you'd have more than 2 forks. Jensen, so I'm looking at the menu and I can't read it for real. Like it would take John to interpret it. I couldn't read this. And so when you don't know what you're doing, follow somebody who does. So he says, well, go ahead. And they bring out the wine thing first. And he said, would you like some wine? And I didn't drink. I'd never had a drink in my life at that time. I've had 1 or 2 glasses of wine since, I've got to confess, so I don't go to hell. But I'd never had a glass of wine, right? And I said, no, sorry, I don't drink. And he goes, you don't? I didn't know he didn't drink. I didn't know he'd never had any alcohol or anything. And so he just said, well, what would you like? I said, whatever you're getting, go ahead, sir. And so he orders for me, and it was so intimidating, to be honest with you. I immediately called up my secretary and I said, send me to etiquette class. I promise. She goes, why? I said, prepare me because God just told me he's going to take me somewhere that I'm not prepared for right now. And the Lord spoke to me and said, I'm preparing you for something. And so just like Dr. Ben Carson was reading his books, I was taking etiquette classes. So I needed to know. I didn't know I'd land up at the White House, but I needed to know they do a lot more than 2 forks at the White House. I couldn't be going, hey y'all, where's that plastic, okay? I'm picking up some ribs with my fingers. So I got to know him, his family. And when I'd go back to the office, he'd always say, Paula, why don't you pray for everybody? I'd be like, just on the spot. Or call me in and say, here, do a Bible study. I mean, it was all the time. And so he would bring me in, and I think, well, they're going to kick me out of his office in a couple minutes, but I would just sit there like a fly on the wall. And I'd get to know, I'd watch it all. I would see his conversations, his communications, how he interacted with his children, how he treated people. Like Dr. Carson said, I personally watched people that slam him on the internet, slam him on social media, act like they have come in just drooling to be with Mr. Trump then. I mean, all the time. I could just sit here and name them all out. Never. Just one of the most open guys. I remember this phone call comes in one day, and there's a frantic woman, and the receptionist comes to and says, Mr. Trump, there's a mom, and there was something with the state lines and insurance, and said her daughter's dying. She had some rare form of cancer, so her daughter's dying, but she's able to get a transplant, and she needs it. But they can't get her across the state line. Before they could even finish, she said, send my plane. I've watched this over and over. Send my plane, go get her, take care of you. Over and over. As I'd sit there for hours and hours, I'd be mesmerized because first off, when he was doing The Apprentice, he'd have all these hundreds of cameras and workers and everything else. And I thought, he's such a visionary. He was so far ahead of things. And then I'd watch how he would run his business. Like he was doing a contract one time for a property that was beneath one of his main buildings. And he negotiated it for 89 years. And I thought, why would you negotiate this for 89 years? Because if I'm going to be around someone, well, I'll even confess further. All right, see, I believe God gives us all time. And so we all have 7 days, 24 hours. So I knew how much I had to bring in to take care of my staff and buildings and everything else. So one day, Jensen, I said, if I worked 40 hours, which I've never done in my life, I work a lot more than that, but it's 40 hours for a week, how much would that be? And I knew how much per hour that I had to generate in order to do that. So one day I took $6 billion and I divided it by 52 weeks by 40 hours. And I figured out every time I sat with him was about $185 million. So I paid attention. I wanted to know, how did you think? Who is this man? And he was the most generous, compassionate man. So he was such a visionary, and he's doing that because I hadn't done real estate in my life, and had a little fixers up, and I'd sell here and there. I would be like, why is he doing an 87-year lease? He goes, oh, Paula, kids have enough money and everything else. He goes, I go, why did you just do that for 80-some or 89 years and not do a 2 to 3 or 5-year lease or something? He goes, Paula, like he said, it's all about lineage and legacy and what you leave. And I'm thinking to myself when he says that to me, I go, you talk more kingdom language than most pastors I know. So then I have a few friends, and one of them has her brother has a big church, very large church, and it's Lisa and Deborah, and we're having a girlfriend time in New York, and they go, we want to meet Miss Trump, we want to meet Miss Trump. I said, okay, come on down. And I called him up, I said, I've got some friends who want to meet you. He's like, oh, bring them on down, Paula. This was all the time. So I bring them down, and I said, this is Lisa, and of course he knows her brother, knows who they are from watching them on TV, and he says, you know, this is Mr. Trump. So he looks at me and he goes, how's their marriage? And I'm like, sir, excuse me, he's my friend, so I'm just like right away, and I'm kind of giving him that look. It's been a while now, and he said, how's their marriage? And he goes, she goes, it's really good, sir, it's really good. He goes, no, do they really love each other? And she's like, yeah, they really love each other. Yes, sir, they really do. He goes, do they really love each other? Yes, sir, they do. He goes, because we can't afford to lose another one to the kingdom. And here he is, just, cares about a person and where they are in life. And so he turns over to Deborah and he goes, now, what do you do? She goes, well, sir, I do human trafficking, and I go out on the streets, and I minister to the prostitutes, and I get these girls off the streets, and I preach the gospel of Jesus Christ and tell them how God, and before she can even finish, he says, Rona! And Rona comes coming and said, bring me my checkbook. And he starts to write out a $10,000 check. It wouldn't be the first one. He'd write out many $10,000 checks. And this guy walks in his office at the same time, because he's got this open door policy. He just walks in and looks at him and he goes, you know what she does? She rescues girls off the street. He goes, now this is the early 2000s. She ministers to the prostitutes. He goes, you got $10,000, write her a check right now. He gives a total shakedown right there. His kids are some of the most amazing human beings. You want to know about a person? Get to know their family.
Yeah.
They would come in the office all the time. Everyone, I'm on and off, and we all got to know each other very close, because at one time, well, let me tell this first. I was in New York so often because I had a big church up there, and I said, man, we were out to lunch one day, and I said, these hotels get expensive. I said, I just need a place. He goes, well, I've got one. I thought, I'm sure you do. You're Trump. He said, come on, I want to show it to you. And he just built this building, the Roosevelt, right? It's the Roosevelt Hotel. And he built it. And we were walking out of his main place on Fifth Avenue there. And first thing I noticed is he stops at the hot dog vendor. And I just pay attention in life. Pay attention in life. He stops at the hot dog vendor and he's like, has this conversation, knows his name, knows his wife's name. Starts talking, and I'm like, this is Donald Trump, the $6 billion mogul real estate apprentice, and he's talking to the hot dog vendor like it's his best friend, because it was. Hey, and he keeps walking down, and then there's these guys on the construction site. They're like, yo, Mr. Trump, and he stops and he's pointing up and telling them how to fix something and what to do there in this building and etc. It's just wild. That's why they call him the blue-collar billionaire, because he's really a down-to-earth person. And we'll talk in a minute, because I want you to understand the man. Because people say, hey, what's his personality? Oh, he's tough. And we needed someone tough. He's a disruptor. He can fight. Trust me. I've been his pastor for 19 years. He didn't start fighting when he got into Washington. But I'll tell you what, he doesn't ever pick a fight, but he sure will finish one. And he's not fighting for himself, he's fighting for you. He's fighting for your family, he's fighting for your children, he's fighting for your grandchildren. He's fighting for freedom, come on, he's fighting for America. He's fighting against socialism and Marxism. They did spy on the campaign. And you want to know where they started? They started on the Russian hoax 19 minutes after his inauguration. They tried to take him out before he got in. But God just keeps his hand on him. And he knows that. He knows that. So we're walking down, he shows me this place. Anyway, I end up buying this little unit. I still have it today. I bought it like in 2004, so it's been, 16 years? You know, we still have the same doorman, the same receptionist, the same security, the same janitor. Her name's Miss Fanny, and she worked for the Roosevelt, and she went to him and said, "Sir, I've taken care of this building for as long as it's been." She said, "And I still want to take care of it." And he gave her the job. Every single person in that apartment or condo unit that I had is still the same people that have always been there. Only one person has changed, and that's the doorman. That tells you a lot about a person. Oh, I can keep going about stories and stories. So we're in there, and I love how he would be with his kids. Remember, Eric would be coming back from college, and I love Eric. So Eric built $20-something million pediatric center at St. Jude's. Ivanka went out and worked for someone else to make sure she would make it strong before she ever went and built her own business and worked with her dad. She was the smartest. I would be the only people up at 5 a.m. I'd be working out in the morning. The only other person in the gym would be Ivanka Trump. She would be up, going, she'd walk down. I mean, she'd say hello to everybody. It's not like some arrogant, just some of the most down-to-earth people. So I'll never forget, like Eric would tell me the stories, and I'd laugh about him because his dad would always, still very close, you should see him with his kids and grandkids. And he'd line them up when they were little and give them their lunch every single day till they went off to college. Give them their lunch, and he'd kiss them, give them their lunch, kiss them, and he'd say, three things. Say it with me. No smoking, no drinking, right? And no drugs. He said 3 things. No smoking, no drinking, no drugs. Come on, say it with me. No smoking, no drinking, no drugs. And the kids would repeat it back. And Eric would go, "But I'm only 5, Dad." That's for real. And you know what? His kids never got involved in drugs or drinking or smoking. His kids never got involved in lifestyles that would embarrass him. I wish I could say the same. I've had some challenges with some of mine. It says so much. Now, I just keep going about how when he started, I'm almost through, Todd. When he started, I've got to finish it up. But when he was offered one of the biggest of his career decisions, a man came in and pitched him a big offer, but he wasn't going to get paid much. He'd get paid very little. And he said, shook his hand and said, "I'll do it." And he calls up his agent, calls up his attorneys. They said, "You can't do this. It's going to absolutely kill your career. There's no way you do this." He goes, "But I shook his hand." He goes, "It doesn't matter what you said. I shook his hand." You know how easy it is to stand here and say promises made, promises kept? This is a man that when he shakes your hand. You see, when I was sitting in the limo one time with the family and I was there, he was going off. I was like, what in the world is he going off on? "Oh, I don't care if I've got to build the building. I don't care if I've got to tear it down." This is early 2000s. "I don't care, we're down in that Mar-a-Lago area." And he said, "It doesn't matter. You tell them, and I don't care. You get this attorney, and you do this, and da-da-da-da-da." And I'm going, what is he fighting about and fussing? What is he willing to pay so many millions of dollars about? They were going to take his flag down off Mar-a-Lago. And because they were going to do that, he figured a way around their codes by building it up bigger and making a hill and a mount so that he could put the American flag, and it still stands there. He hasn't just been fighting for the American flag since 2016. He's been fighting for the American freedom flag for a long time. In conclusion, how did we get here? You see, he said to me, he would always ask me stuff like, "Paul, pray that Ivanka marries the right person. Pray that Eric does good on his test. Pray," just like normal. He calls me up one Sunday. I did 7 services on Sunday. And he calls me up, he goes, "Okay, I've got a question for you." I said, "What is that?" "I'm walking out the door, getting ready to do 7 services. He said, "This forgiveness thing." And he went wasn't talking about redemption. He was born again. He's saved. He's a Christian. Our president's a Christian. He was fighting with Rosie O'Donnell, all right, and Barbara Walters. Don't tell all the story. So he calls me. I'm telling you, this is not the first fight he's ever been in. So he calls me up, he goes, Paula, he goes, I need to know. And the New York Times has said he was worth like $3 billion when he was worth $6 billion. I'm like, what's the difference of $3 billion, you know? He said, Paula, you don't understand. You can call along to do this. He goes, I need to know something, this forgiveness. You're always preaching on, you've got to forgive people. He goes, this forgiveness thing. He said, okay, tell me, when do I turn the other cheek? And when do I pull out the sword like Jesus said? Sir, I'm going to get back to you. So he calls me up and says, I want us to pray. He said, I don't like the direction our country's going in. He said, I'm really thinking, there's a burden on my heart. I feel like maybe I'm supposed to run for president. He said, would you pray? He goes, Paul, could you bring some pastors around? It's 2011. I said, yes, sir. I brought 20-something pastors around. We prayed for almost 6 hours, actually. 6 hours we prayed. He was in there, not the whole time, but almost the entire time. He calls me up the next day and he goes, what'd God say to me? And I said, sir, I think you're going to be president one day. I go, but it's not the time. He said, that's what I feel. Because he had to make a major decision within 24 hours. And I'll never forget, Jensen, a tear came down my eye because I almost knew it. I think I can say this here prophetically without you guys thinking it's crazy or weird. I almost knew it. You know how your Holy Spirit knows something?
Yeah.
And a tear falls down my eyes and I said, as my friend, sir, I said, this country needs you. I've watched you now. I know who you are. I said, but I would hate to think the price you and your family would have to pay. Little did I know, Ralph, I thought that price would just be giving up what he would call perfect life, like you go into public life. None of us had any idea that literally God would use a man to stand in the gap and make up the hedge between literal, like not Ben Carson said, Democrat and Republican, but between God and Satan, between good and evil, between freedom and Marxism. What's sustained him and what's going to keep him and what's going to put him in next time, keep on your feet because I'm through. It's going to be prayer and fasting and you using your voice and you talking and you activating everybody you can and you signing up for the next 3 days to get on doors and get on social media and go get people to vote because I can tell you all day long about his personality. I'm almost through, but he's also done a whole lot of policy. Let me tell you some of that policy. Remain standing. The first year alone, he lifted off 2.4 million adults out of poverty, 1.4 million children off of poverty, 5.6 million children out of food stamps. He established a Center of Faith and Opportunity Initiative, which Pastor Todd told you about. That not only do I answer as advisor to the president, but also to Attorney William Barr against all religious freedoms. You have faith directors, you have policy. Come on, Rich, you're here somewhere. Rich used to be at HUD and he's been with us in so many places. Come on, we have faith directors, we have policy, we have legal, every single department and every agency. Every agency, even down to SEC, Security Exchange Commission. You want to know what this president did? You've heard it, prison reform, but what does that mean? First step. That means 3,000 inmates that got undue sentences that were done under the Clinton administration, and Biden supported it, and Biden signed for it, and Biden stood with it, that went to prison for things like 3 ounces of marijuana that he now wants to make legal, that he would get 30 years, and 3,000 people have gone out of prison so far that have gotten a second chance because we believe in second chances, and 90% of those came out of the Black American community. What has our president done? Opportunity zones you've heard a lot about. That was a stroke of the pen that through job acts and tax cuts enabled enabled the wealth of people to be transferred into private vehicles to go into the most distressed opportunities that is put between 75 and 100 billion dollars in over 9,000 opportunity zones, which has created over 500,000 jobs. Come on, that's talking about bringing forth real change. When you want to understand what that is, what has our president done? Our president has done stuff like human trafficking that you've heard, 9 pieces of legislation, over 5,000 arrests of the most wicked people who would sell a child 5 to 7 times a day, because you can only sell a drug 1 time, but you can sell a child 5 times. But he brought down the largest internet and established the biggest commission that's ever been established. What has he done for religious liberties and freedom? He's had the largest human rights. He was the first ever president to speak at the UN on religious liberty. May I remind you, he's the one that brought Andrew Brunson back from Turkey. Obama didn't do it. Former people didn't do it. Come on, he brought him back for preaching the gospel. He's the one that negotiated out. He's the one that has stood the hardest. He's the one that came down hard on China. You want to talk about how most of the world is under religious persecution? 63 billion people, or 63 million people, have been killed in China because of their faith. Muslims, Christians, all kinds of people, because they don't worship government and they chose to worship their God. But our president says we don't worship government, we worship God. He's come hard against Cuba and Venezuela because he says, no, when you lose, like Dr. Ben Carson said, freedom of religion, you lose everything. He said we will put Mary back in Christmas, and he's done a whole lot more than put Mary back in Christmas. He gave us the Johnson Amendment. He gave us the largest human rights ever with the Ministerial Alliance that brought thousands of people that have been persecuted because of their faith. Not only did he do that, but he signed the EO for the Religious Executive Order of Liberties, and he put literally millions of dollars for persecuted people because of their faith all over the world. What has he done? He's abolished ISIS, killing Soleimani. Come on, and al-Baghdadi. That's the best as I can say. What's he done for Israel? He moved the embassy. He recognized Jerusalem as capital. He recognized the Golan Heights. Come on. The Abraham Accords, the first thing it says is about religious liberties and freedom. What has he done? You know about school choice. He says parents choose better than do the teachers' unions, which Biden will go with the unions, which will wipe out your Christian schools, which will wipe out charter schools, which means that just because you're in a bad situation like I was, living in a trailer, doesn't mean you are bad. It means I just need an opportunity to make good choices. Come on. It means I don't want to be dependent on a government to tell me how to raise my child or what I'm going to do. Let's talk about pro-life, the most pro-life. The first thing he did was he defunded Title 10, the Hyde Amendment, come on, which said you're not going to use government funding for abortions. Mexico City policy, $9 billion of your taxpayer money he brought back because they were funding foreign abortions. He was the first president to go to the March for Life as a sitting living president. What's he done for our Department of Defense? He's built our military up where they were literally using pieces of other planes to fix our broken military. But with $743 billion, he repaired us to be the strongest military. He gave our great men and women in the military a long overdue 3.1% raise every single time. What's he done for working parents? He did the child tax credit, which said in 2019, that means 40 million families got $88 billion back. Your average that has gone in your pocket just because of the job acts and the tax cuts has put between $1,400 and $2,000 back in every person's pocketbook. Come on, from the poorest to the middle class, he's rebuilt this economy. He will do it. If anybody can do it, our president is the one that will do it. What has he done? PPP. He made sure that the churches were not left out. When we were going through the coronavirus, he made sure that we were taken care of and that our economy was taken care of. Houses of worship had been protected. He removed the restrictions off grants. He removed and rolled back the Obama-era executive order. You don't even know these things maybe because they didn't enforce it everywhere. But there were laws in place that said as a church, if you were going to counsel or you were going to feed somebody food, you had to first refer them to a secular organization. That's what President Obama did. Our president looked at that and said, take that out. He said, because people of faith know how to do it he put us in stuff like United States, Mexico, Canada agreement that has brought $173 billion into America and over 60, how many thousand jobs have we brought in? I don't know, 60-something thousand jobs, 176,000 jobs and $68 billion in here. What's he done? He's tough on China, and he needs to be. You know what that means? He's brought $1.4 trillion back to the American economy from China alone. You want to know how much we give Israel? $4.2 billion every year. I can sit here and keep going. Let me just talk about policy for a minute. You want to talk about what he's done in the black community? Historical black colleges don't have to go back and beg. He said, I'm going to remove student loans from every disabled vet. It's forgiven right now. It's absolutely forgiven. He put $73.1 million into vet. He made sure that our veterans were taken care of so that they could have veterans choice, so that they would just have to wait a year or 10 months until they could be seen somewhere. What is he doing and what has he done? He's designated 1.3 million new acres of wilderness. Large and colored. Oh, you guys know what he's done. He's the largest, we are now the largest energy and oil producer in the world. And I'm sure when there was that last town hall and Biden said he's going to do away with, he's trying to walk out of this one, isn't he? That he's going to do away with oil and energy and fracking. See, I would have known 6 years ago, I would have thought fracking was some dance like twerking. I wouldn't have known, Rich. I was just your average person that didn't know. I kind of said, oh, I like him, I like them. I wasn't sure, but I know. I told the president this. He goes, Paula, fracking is. I go, I know now. I understand. I've lived in this, but that will eliminate 612,000 jobs in Pennsylvania alone. You know how many jobs will be eliminated if Biden got in just from that fracking and just from what he wants to do in the oil industry? Not talking about manufacturing, which we understand very well here in the state of Michigan. But when we talk about that, you're eliminating $16 million. Let's talk about how much it's going to cost you for gas. Because when he does that, your gas is going to be $131 a barrel, which means per gallon you're going to be paying about $5.63 and not the $1 to $2, which is going to add into per household. He's going to add $6,000 just for you to be able, but he probably wants to take away your car too, because Biden is just a puppet for a radical left agenda that wants to absolutely desecrate and ruin America. Not just take our jobs, not just let China own us, not just take away our God, but take away every freedom. But we say no. And if every evangelical, we are the majority of, I call us Christians, we are the majority in this country still. We make up the biggest block, don't we, Ralph? Still, of any voting block, we are the largest. If every one of us get out and get somebody to get out, it's going to be a landslide, and it has to be a landslide. And the reason, because we're not going to give them room to contest this. We're not going to give, well, I'm going to say it because of my last one, we're not going to give Soros the ability to put money in well-funded, organized riots so they can destroy our cities. No, not on our watch. We're going to stand at the threshold, and they're not going to take away our sovereignty. They're not going to take away our God. They're not going to take away our guns. You better not come to my house. AR-15 waiting for you, Joe. Anyway, in the name of Jesus. All right? No, I'm serious. They can't take away our stuff. I mean, for real, Dr. Carson laid it out. This is what they do. They take your freedoms, and they just, it's like putting a frog in a pot. If you put him in fast, he'll jump out. But if you want to boil him to death, you put him in and you turn it up slowly. And he dies. He doesn't even know that he's already dead. Because the church became lukewarm. God in His mercy and God in His grace uses flawed people. He don't pretend to be a pastor, but I can tell you this is a good man, and he is a God man, and he is a man that will fight for you and fight for me and fight for righteousness. And he said, make the church essential, Paula. I was there in March when we found out about COVID. I remember walking into this conference room, and he looked at me. He goes, can we have church outside? He said, the church church has to keep going. He said, because if what, they just got the information, it was being released. He said, because if people lose hope in God, he said, if they lose God, we're going to lose everything. He knows. Now what are we going to do about it? People always talk to me about, oh, if you get him to do this, get him to do that. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to change somebody 74. You're going to change me, and I'm 54. Only God can change me. Pray for me. He said, but I tell you what, maybe he doesn't need to be changed. Maybe you just need to pray. Amen. Maybe God needed to raise someone up that had the courage, that had the boldness, and had the integrity to do what he is doing. God bless you. God bless Michigan. God bless America. And God bless Donald J. Trump.